Hello and welcome to the Joinery Business Podcast. Now, this year we'd like to take more of a focus of the internals here at the Joinery Coach and the Marketing Joint, having a look more at the inside of the business and who's running it. So to start off that series, we're starting with a series called Get to Know Us. And our first special guest is Nigel Newman. Now, Nigel's been on the podcast many times before, giving advice and his general ideas around certain concepts. But today, we're actually focusing more on Nigel himself, his background in joinery, and some of his mentality and ideologies around running a joinery business. Nigel joined the team at the start of 2023 as one of our on-site coaches with more of a specialty around factory flow. Since then, he's been an invaluable member of the team, giving a lot of excellent advice and coaching to a lot of our clients. And today we get to see a bit more of his thoughts and feelings around running a joinery business, as well as his background with joinery and with Bruce. If you have any questions about today's episode, be sure to jump on over to the Joinery Business Hub on Facebook. Now, without further ado, let's jump into today's episode.
Hey, welcome to the Joinery Business Podcast. My name is Bruce, and today I've got a really fun and interesting guest. And in this segment, we're going to start a new segment that's called Meet the Team at the Joinery Coach. And today I'm joined by our Factory Flow Fundamentals, or our 3F, our flow, Factory Flow expert, Nigel Newman.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Welcome and glad to be here.
Yeah, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. And it's as you know, we love people coming to the barn and drinking coffee, so fun times.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
So, Nigel, I think what would be really awesome is if you could maybe just share some of your background, just briefly tell people where you come from, like how you got here, basically.
Sure, yeah. So I love manufacturing. At a very early age, I realized I like working my hands way more than sitting in an office job. So I didn't go to formally trade school, but I did do very much trade-related subjects in my education. And then I went and worked in a machine shop. I left school fairly early, and I was just running machines. And then I started to do assembly work, learn how to set up the machines, just that normal pathway you do when you enter a shop, in the old days anyway, of just coming up, gradually through the processes in the business. I really liked machines. I loved running machines because they always did what you told them, kind of. And if you made a mistake, you looked back at yourself and you go, oh, okay, I can see what I did wrong. But then around my 30s, so I was running small teams, running large machining sections and sub-assembly sections, getting to know a lot about like technical drawings and how things go together or not, as the case may be. But then I really started to have some problems with my back and just the wear and tear on the body that happens when you get to your 30s if you're in manual work. And I had to transition into more of a leadership role. And I really struggled with that transition to management initially because I very much like using my hands, and now I couldn't do that so much. But it was a worthwhile journey. After 3 or 4 years, I started to get the hang of it. I started to realize people aren't like machines. They're a little bit different. You give
it's like the Terminator, where they...
you give 10 people a set of instructions and you come back an hour later and 3 of them done it one way, 2 of them have done something completely different, and a couple of guys have done it right, and you're going, what did I do wrong? So it's really that kind of, I guess you learn to reflect a bit deeper about your own actions and become a bit more self-aware as a person, which I started to enjoy after a while. And that led me to getting a coach, an actual personal coach at a business I was working with that really helped me understand management and running a business, actually. Really, went from the tools into leadership. But always in and around manufacturing, planes, trains, automobiles, boats, you name it. I've probably pretty much helped design and build and implement change in those kind of manufacturing environments.
And we met many years ago when we were in the training industry together.
We did indeed.
So we got to know each other then, and kind of I always had a bit of an appreciation for your skills and your knowledge. So and for you as a person, of course, and being able to invite you into the Joinery Coach as a team member was a wonderful opportunity. Talk a little bit about what you've experienced so far, because working exclusively in the cabinet industry is probably a new thing for you, even though I know in your training experience, you've probably been in and around cabinets and staircases and those sorts of things. But now that you've been truly embedded in the industry for a while, what stands out to you? Like, what's some of the main highlights?
I guess, let me first talk about, every industry is slightly different, but, when we talk about flow, it's actually very common, very similar. There's lots of commonalities to it. So the first thing was getting my head around the common processes that happen in a typical joinery shop or cabinet making shop. The good thing is, because I'm very well comfortable with CNCs, that wasn't the hard learning curve. It was more like anything. You start to get into the way the teams work in and around when they have to build things. So it's the very manual aspect. There's a lot of craftsman knowledge that's passed on through that team. And there's a lot of nuances to the way they work. So I guess the fun part was first getting my head around that, but then also starting to see what initially looks like quite complex is actually when you stand back, there's a lot of commonality.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similar problems that everybody's dealing with, but like with all small businesses, you kind of think you're in it on your own. You kind of just see your world. You don't realize there's 50 other people pretty much with the same problems, the same kind of issues, but you just think they're yours, right? And the first thing you tell the person that's coming to help you is, you don't understand. We're different. We're unique. Everything we do is different than everybody else you're dealing with. And we're going, well, not completely true. Really. Not completely true. But what I really enjoyed was seeing, the kind of clients that the joinery coach tracks is people that are really dedicated to A, their team, and B, their business. Yeah. And typically in that order, I'd say. There's not one client I've met so far that I've got a feeling that they don't care about their team and they're just in it for the money. In fact, some of them almost too caring to the point where they're not focused enough on the money and it's detrimental to the business. Which is where things like the financial certainty program really help them understand. Because what I think you've said to me many times and I've recognised is that a lot of these guys were great joiners or taught by their fathers, but they never actually taught how to run a business.
Yes.
And something I didn't learn until later part of my career, and I had to work in a large business where they actually give you all the money and all the numbers, and it's your job to actually run the business from where to go, budget and everything. So I fully appreciate that is a challenge for people. Yeah. If you're good at building something, you're not necessarily good at running numbers on a spreadsheet. It's quite a different world to live in, but you've really got to be across both, or good to understand both.
Yeah. So seeing multiple businesses across the country and actually across the world, really. But really, they're different because they're different people. But really, if you break it down just into process, they all kind of do things the same way.
Correct. Yeah. They're a design and manufacture type business, which is in a made-to-order system. So we're not talking about cookie cutting. We're not talking about large inventories on shelves. We're talking everything has to happen really fast in these kind of industries, and it has to be right. Because you've got every specification is different, every customer requirement is different.
Can't just pull another one off the shelf and put it in place.
And it is, there are 4 kind of models for lean, and this is the hardest one. When you look at the 4 types of application of lean into business types, this is the hardest one. So it does need a high level of rigor around the way you implement those processes and design the flow in the factory. And it's not just the factory, actually, it starts at sales.
Starts at the beginning.
But the flow has to be right all the way through, because as we know, if we don't complete anything correctly at each stage, it just becomes a bigger problem further down the line. And we love kicking problems into the factory and go, they'll deal with it. They'll run around with their hair on fire for a couple of days and they'll get it sorted out.
Let's just get it on site really quickly so we can figure out what to do rather than...
it's like finishing nothing and just wrapping it all up at the end, right? And as long as it looks good when the client turns up, we're happy. And what we really want is it to look good at every stage, just to be proud of our process at every stage, because it's accurate, it's complete, it's on time, and the quality's there. Because then the next guy gets the benefits of that. The next person in the flow gets the benefit.
You joined us last year being 2023.
Around March.
Early last year. And we'd already had a what we called our 3F program, our Factory Flow Fundamentals program in place. And when you and I started analyzing this, we kind of realized, hey, this is really just fundamentals. It's really just the basics, right? And that was pretty much all we had in place. But even just getting the basics and the fundamentals right created a massive step forward for people. But since then, we've really taken the program and scaled it up, haven't we? Talk a little bit about how we've modified our Factory Flow Fundamentals program into what it is today.
Sure. For those who are maybe listening in today, the name for this extension of the initial basics, the fundamentals, is called the Joinery Manufacturing Excellence Program. And what we recognise in all aspects of implementing change in a business, especially your process, we want to implement processes, and there's a maturity that happens. So yes, you've got to get the foundational knowledge and understand the basics, but that's not the end. Then there is, as you start to get good at the basics, you start to realise there's another level you can move into, and there's some more systems that can be put in play around flow in the factory, around quality system, around safety systems, around delivery systems, that actually start to make those tools that we put in the foundational level actually really start to work together. They kind of all click together in the system. And now we get this bigger benefit. So instead of the 10, 15%, maybe 20% gain, we're now looking at the 50% gain or higher.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there. There's another level as well. When you get into operational excellence, which is really, when you're benchmarking against the best you can possibly be at what you do in your industry, So how well are we running our CNC compared to benchmark people? Not, hey, I'm running it better than I did last month.
Yeah.
Running it a few more hours, getting a few more boards. No. World class, what is that compared to that? But not the guy down the road, not your competitor, benchmark level. I love it when people start to realize that, hey, when I start competing with myself and benchmarking myself against what's possible, I don't even worry about my competitor anymore. They're kind of in the rearview mirror, just disappearing in the dust. Often when we only look at the competitor, we just, as long as we're ahead of them, we're happy. We kind of ease back and we go, it's okay, we're better than the guy down the road. This journey is not about that. It's not about being better than the guy next to you. It's about being the best you can be.
Yes.
So the intermediate level, is what comes after the fundamentals. Then we talk more about systems and how do you link these two together to kind of supercharge them. And then you go into the excellence, which is really like having really clearly defined, high level KPIs that flow across the business. Everyone's measuring what they're doing in an effective way, and they're looking at improving it to getting up to the 95, 98% margin. Like no defects, no van going back to pick something up you've forgotten, or everything is working as best as it possibly can. And, at that point there, yes, you can ease back a little bit because you now got the metrics and you're competing with yourself and you're at that level of really high performance. But, we recognize that's also a journey. And the best way to move through this journey is collective knowledge through the business, not just top down and not just bottom up, because both of those have pros and cons, let's just say. Bottom up can be very frustrating for the team because they get this new knowledge. The managers aren't really sure what they're talking about, so they try and change something, and then often it gets pushed back to the old way. If it's top down, the manager or the production manager or the owner, well, they've got 5 hats on already, and now we're asking them to be a coach, and kind of, that doesn't happen overnight because they've got to get pretty well versed in the new knowledge before they can really pass it on to someone else. So having the ability to come to site, which is what the JME program offers, 3, 4, 5 times a year to support, working with your team at the shop floor level.
Actually being on site, but being present the whole time by way of being available to help them move forward.
Yeah, and then also the coaching sessions, which can be one-on-one or group sessions, which come as part of the Joinery Coach program from the top down. So you kind of get this kind of building knowledge from the bottom up and building from the top down, but we're also having the conversations at the right level. Because you can't talk at the high level the same way you can talk at the shop floor level. It's different world for them.
Different language. All right. So when we first got together at the beginning of last year, we looked at what we already had, and there was some, let's say, some more advanced skills in the fundamentals or the basics program. And so it's probably fair to say what we did is we pared it back. We focused more on the basics. Let's talk just a little bit about some of the basics and how they actually apply to specifically the joinery business. Because you and I talk a fair bit about lean as a methodology and a world practice and all that sort of fun stuff. But we do find that people that run joinery businesses kind of gloss over all of that. It doesn't mean anything. We've got to be very, very specific.
And if you really go back to the origins of where lean came from, it doesn't really focus on lean. Lean wasn't even a word back then, didn't exist. That was a word that was added in to help people understand this new thing that was coming out of manufacturing. And the one I love is, this is again not my words, because they talk a lot about, how do you engage the guys who actually do the value-added work, the people actually building the cabinets, running the machines. And I love this one. It's, our job is to make the job easier, better, faster, cheaper. In that order. Very important in that order. Don't make it cheaper if it makes it harder. Don't buy them cheap tools thinking I'm being lean or I'm being more efficient, I'm spending less money, but it's actually made the job harder. We make it better, we're normally improving the quality of what they're doing. So the drawings coming through, making sure that they are correct on the machine so the guy can run the parts and they go well to assembly and everything goes together properly. That we can produce parts on the bench because we have accurate information. The specification from sales has come through with the right information for the guy on the bench. He's not dealing with a big pack of documents, trying to work out what he's got to do or if things are correct or not. I think, for me, it's that's that simple message. Our job today, if we're here training you or if we're here coaching you, is to make the work easier. if you any point you feel we're not making it easier, that's the time to put the hand up and tell us why.
And it's probably fair to say that one of the biggest stress points in let's say the process of a job being finished. So when a job is, contract is signed, deposits paid, now we have a job. Yeah. In the early stages, most joinery businesses are going to be pretty good at working out the details, right? How do we build it? What material? And many are going to guess at the time, but they don't really see that as a problem quite yet. Yeah. And then they put it into the factory and they're going, okay, when do we need to start this job? Yeah. Now stress happens, and it's probably one of the biggest stress points that most factories have. Yeah. Because I put out polls on social media sometimes, do you struggle with factory scheduling? And everybody says, oh God, yeah, that's my biggest problem. Yeah. Or work is sitting in the factory not going because that's really a scheduling problem. We did it too soon. Yeah. So talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing in the past year. How do we make the scheduling something that people can first of all understand? How do we do this? Yeah. Then how do we actually do it rather than jumping to some fancy program that we think is going to do it for us? Yeah. We're actually going to work through, when you break down the process, drawing, machining, assembling, prepping and loading, and then, eventually delivery. Yeah. Talk a little bit about some of the breakthroughs that you've had on helping our clients find scheduling skills.
As you say, most people, they struggle with scheduling, or they think, or even if they have a tool, they'll think the scheduling tool isn't working. And I say, look, scheduling is actually a really, really dumb process, and it's a really dumb tool. It relies on certain inputs. Yeah. So if you don't actually thought about how long it takes to do each stage of the work, your schedule tool is actually not going to work. If you're putting the wrong numbers in, your schedule tool's not going to work. It's not going to help you. So the first thing is, okay, let's make sure that if we're estimating drafting time, we're estimating procurement time, we're estimating cutting time and edging time, that we've got some rough numbers and they're roughly accurate. They're not wildly out. And I know you do great work around helping with the quotation aspect, and that really helps them validate that their times are reasonably accurate. Because if you start planning any kind of schedule with inaccurate times, again, it's not...
How do you schedule with bad times?
It's not the schedule tool's fault if it's starting to tell you to do things at the wrong time, or it's telling you can't make jobs on time. So typically what we do is scheduling, we want to go, right, well, how much work do you have in the books? How far out is it? And we want to see some kind of rough cut capacity plan, because the worst thing with a schedule is to overload it or underload it, actually. You're going to have people standing around with not enough work, or you're going to have them overburdened, rushing, asking for overtime, working 6 days a week, getting too tired and fatigued. So the first job is to make sure the work coming into the factory has been level loaded. It's a term we use. And that's really just going, what's my capacity each month? And make sure sales, because they're normally the culprit, aren't jamming too much work in, or going, hey, production manager, can you just fit this extra job in? It's just for a friend of mine. You can do it. It's only going to take you a couple of hours. Yeah. So being quite strict around that capacity plan. Now, I'm not saying it's a hard rule. If you want to open up Saturdays and do some extra work, that's up to you, but there's a premium cost to that. You're not probably selling the work at premium time and a half. You're selling it at standard time.
You don't put overtime in your estimate.
You should not be selling work into Saturdays unless you can find a way to charge for that rate, because it is time and a half for the guys. Yeah. Plus, you're going to fatigue your people over time. So ideally, a healthy factory is 5 days, and we plan our capacity plan to be in line with what the factory can handle. Yeah. So rule one is make sure the capacity meets can be handled by the factory in normal hours.
I think that the technical explanation is balance your supply and your demand perfectly.
Yes, yeah, that's what I mean by level loading. You should be producing exactly what is being demanded of you, not more, not less. Yeah, that's the perfect system, right? Does it ever run that well? If you can get within 5% of that, you're doing pretty good. I think you're doing pretty well. Yeah. And again, I've worked in many industries, and this is a very common problem in many industries. Yeah. The other interesting I've noticed when we talk to clients is I ask them, what's their lead time? And they'll give me a number, but I said, what's that based on? And they won't actually have, they go, but I've always told people it's 4 weeks. I've always told people it's 6 weeks. I'm going, but we can actually work out what your lead time is once we do this breakdown of how long things take.
Yeah, so some people will say to the client, we can be here in 8 weeks. Yes. Thinking that's actually the lead time, but it's actually just a rough sales.
It's just a number. Yeah. And it's probably a number that they've worked comfortably with in the past, which if things are not changing dramatically in the environment, you're not getting jobs moved out, you're not getting a change in the type of work you bring in, it may work for you. It may be enough to keep you going. But, there's a huge opportunity if you actually get the numbers right in your schedule. Yeah. Because you're going to start to expose what your capacity really is, that you could be doing more work in the same amount of time potentially, and you might have a ton of waste built into the system that you're not aware of.
It's an interesting term to sort of jump off on here in this conversation, because lead time, the average time it takes to complete a job. And most businesses can calculate this. We can say, okay, in this month, we did this many jobs and we worked this many hours, therefore the average job is X. And we might throw out the really big ones and we might throw out the really small ones just to get an average that is a little bit more reliable. Yeah. And one of the things that I think we do exceptionally well is help our clients reduce that average lead time. So if we're here and we're talking, if anybody's listening or watching this podcast and saying, well, what do these guys actually do? They're talking about a lot of stuff that doesn't make any sense to me, or, what do they actually do? Well, the average time it takes to complete a kitchen might be 8 days, 9 days, and again, that's measurable. It's fair to say that after, say, 9 months, 12 months, we've comfortably got a 20 or 30 or 40% reduction in that average lead time.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And so that's a tangible thing. That's a real thing that people can say, oh, well, that alone must perk up some ears.
Yeah. The interesting thing is when you actually start to take them through breaking down the time it takes to do things, and you actually add up the actual task time and the actual time it's actually planned to be in the system, the job from when sales are won it through to delivery, it's actually a fraction of the time. It might take 8 weeks to deliver the kitchen, or even if you improve it down to 4, but you actually see the touch time to do the drawings, run the machine is even a fraction of that.
Yeah, and just because we're waiting for stuff that's gone off to poly to be painted doesn't mean the clock has stopped ticking, right?
That's right.
It's still ticking, so your lead time is still adding up.
Yeah.
And just because we finished a job, except for the one door that we have to go back and replace, does not mean that our lead time is cut off, right?
Yeah.
Lead time doesn't get cut off until the job is 100% finished.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's where a lot of people get lead time wrong. They're not actually measuring when the job is 100% completed.
Yeah, right.
Just when we got there and kind of finished it.
The other good discussion point that comes up often is, especially where they only have a few benches, maybe 2 or 3 benches, and they tend to flex that team a lot. So they'll grab a guy and send him off to site, or they grab him again. But if you've planned that job, let's say it's 2 months out, but you plan to have 2 guys on the bench, so that sets your lead time, because bench is normally your longest manual process.
Yes.
Probably sometimes a little bit longer than installation sometimes. So let's say that job was going to take 3 days in the factory to complete with 2 guys on the bench. But then that week's come along and you've only got 1 guy on the bench. Now it's going to take 6 days. Now your lead time's blown out.
Yeah.
Now you're going to be struggling, rushing. So do you really know to keep how many people on the bench? Because often they go, haven't really thought about that. I have between 1 and 3 people, and I can kind of flex that around as I need to. Yeah. I said, it's good to have a number in your head that you want to try and achieve on a daily basis. So if you have 3 benches, don't plan 3 people, because you have leave, you have absenteeism. So it's probably more like 2.5. And I said, but book a solid 2. Yeah. And then try and always keep that 2, because it will mean your consistency in your lead time.
And you got something in reserve if you need it.
Yeah, you can bring the 3rd guy on when needed to, if they fall behind or there was an issue, and you can accelerate, that bit. But don't just surge and pull people in and out, because it becomes a real nightmare for the production manager.
Yeah.
Because he's constantly having to, basically play with dates as those numbers change. But I said, if you talk to the sales guy, right, we're going to plan 2 guys in there most days or nearly every day. We'll have the 3rd guy as the level we can pull. Yeah. Or maybe he can do sub-assemblies and help speed up the main line or the main benches. But you've got to consider that in your capacity plan, because it's basically what your capacity plan is built on. Is that's the engine of the line. The CNCs can always go a bit faster.
So the capacity is sort of like a bucket, right? Or what do you have available to be consumed?
Yes.
1 guy on a bench, you've got 7 hours available. Yeah. 2 guys on a bench, you got 14 hours available.
Yeah.
Your capacity is what's available to be consumed. Yeah. And knowing the hours against that capacity is really valuable.
Yeah.
And you're right, because it does really start with the quote or the estimating, because if we don't have the hours right there and the job gets accepted, there ain't no scheduling in the world that's going to help us. We're
right, yeah.
But we do have to shift into efficiencies really quickly, because we don't have enough hours to do the job anyway.
That's right. Yeah.
So
and a lot of people get too tied up on measuring the CNC and the edge band, which I think is important. From you need to know what it's doing each day. But I've yet to meet someone, maybe 1 or 2 clients, where the machine is actually a constraint. It's really always the benches. The bench is working all day every day. The machine running 4 or 5, maximum maybe 6 or 7.
It's never 100%.
Never 100%, right? So I'm saying, look, if you're going to measure somewhere to start with, we need to measure the efficiency of the bench, because if they lose an hour, it's a problem. If the machine loses an hour, it can pick it back up really easily. Yep. It's not saying we don't care about. We want to measure downtime on the machine and understand why it's stopping. But the benches is the bottleneck. Ultimately, a penny spent in anywhere other than the bottleneck, I think it's a famous saying, is a penny wasted, because we really want to make sure that bottleneck can produce at the rate it needs to produce, the demand that's being put in there.
So we do try and find one measurable or one control point in the process, don't we?
Yes,
Say if we
absolutely.
can control or measure that one and improve it, then everything else will kind of
Yeah, I mean, if you think about if you're measuring your completed hours versus the estimate in your workbenches, and that's green, then you're pretty much going to be on time and on schedule. The only other thing you maybe want to check is, am I starting cutting on time in the machine? That's your pacemaker. I would say the machine's pacemaker because it's very reliable. And you can actually schedule at that point, but then check your times at your workbench. And then you're measuring 2 points in the flow. That's really all you need.
So I think, and we don't have the time, or this isn't quite the right, let's say, environment to talk in the details about this. But I often think, wow, like at the end of a week or seeing the results with a client, I often think in my mind, wow, we've cracked the code. We've actually cracked the code of how do we take your typical joinery cabinet making business that's been going for 5 or 10 or sometimes 30 years, that's been kind of pretty much the same for all that time, maybe a little bit better. Maybe they got their CNC machine at some point and they had this sort of accelerated, but haven't really utilized it the way they should.
Yeah.
And then when we really help people learn about efficiencies and creating flow in the process, there's like this massive step forward.
Yes. Yeah.
It is like we've just unlocked the secrets that they never knew before, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, when I talk about the bench process, and hey, you've really just got to make sure they've always got a buffer of work so they never have to stop. And you need to have these cabinets arranged in pigeonholes so they can just build, out of each slot and build the cabinet. The amount of, coin drop moments in the last 12 months where people just go, that just makes perfect sense. Why didn't I think of that before? Yeah. And I go, it's because it is counterintuitive. It does take a little bit of, deeper thinking, reflection, thinking about it. And you've got to be kind of think you're the person doing the work. And like, how many times am I reaching and moving and walking backwards and forwards to do something? Because just because you've got a pile of parts and keeping someone busy is not the same as efficiency.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, what I find really interesting, particularly now, because we've kind of dialed things up again this year, what I find particularly interesting is we've kind of always had that secret code crack, but implementing it or getting it to stick in the business has always kind of been the challenge, right?
Yeah.
Because we've always kind of approached it, like the Joinery Coach approach has been primarily a top-down approach. We work with the owner and the senior management team, and quite often we work with a production manager. And you and I have talked a lot about this prior to this year's new sort of direction, that in many ways it's been very unfair on that production manager for us to come in and say, great, now you've got to take all this stuff that we know and you've got to start doing it with your team. And they're going, oh, hang on, I kind of suck at my job already. And I'm struggling in my job already. Now you're asking me to do more of this stuff that I don't understand. That's always kind of been where let's say where the challenge has been mostly. So now we've taken our approach and said, okay, not only are we going to do that with the production manager, but we're also going to work with the team on the factory floor as well.
Yeah.
So now the pressure's off that person and we can just focus on making them a great production manager while we're working with their team on the factory floor. Now you've just come off a couple of weeks of travel where we've really just launched this new initiative.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing, like the engagement with people on the factory floor and even in the early days, those steps forward.
So, the good thing about the JME program, it actually touches on a subject that we don't have, or we will soon have, but we don't have a lot of information currently in our website. And that's around safety. And safety is a process. And it's a great way to connect with the shop floor, because if you immediately start talking about workbenches or things you don't need in the area, it all becomes quite personal all of a sudden. It's like, oh, you're talking about me and my work area and you're changing things. And I'm not sure if I agree with that.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with what's around me.
You get that initially. But if you talk about safety, that's a pretty much, everyone can agree to that. Like, should there be stuff in front of the fire exit door?
Yeah.
No, probably not.
What if there was a fire? How would you get at the fire?
Yeah, no one's going to disagree, and no one's going to think that's their personal thing you're going after, their personal belief system or how they think work should be. So safety is a great way to introduce standards, which is a really big part of everything we talk about in factory flow is about having standards, but also about measurement even. Measuring safety is quite straightforward. Measuring how many incidents you've had each month, developing an action plan to improve that situation, So everything you get to teach and talk about in safety can actually then be flowed through to quality, can be flowed through to delivery.
Yeah.
So it's actually a great launch pad. And what we found is when we delivered this for the first time in February in Queensland is team very engaged, very happy to open up and be really honest about, these things aren't right. And yes, we're happy to get involved and fix those. So it just builds that kind of like initial trust, and it gives the production manager a great opportunity to, again, have that safety talk in the morning, which we always say is like, run your team meeting in the morning and start with safety. How did safety go yesterday? Any concerns? Yeah. Well, now they have a bit more process knowledge around safety. and also, more importantly, like, what are my responsibilities at work? Well, if companies give me PPE and they put a procedure on the machine saying, well, I've got to wear the PPE, right? Makes sense. Yeah. So it's a good kind of like a bridge to extend that kind of initial trust. Yeah. Just some of the feedback we've had from 2 of the clients in Queensland after training is like, the team's really buzzing. There's really good motivation. They're coming up, bringing up lots of ideas. Yeah. They've reminded us about the things we talked about in the training session. And, 2 of them already have the safety cross up on the wall and some actions around some hazards that were raised, which is part of that initial training session.
And it's one of the things that you and I experienced in the training industry years ago, which is where we were just working with people on the factory floor and the middle and upper management weren't engaged at all. And it just didn't work, right? It just didn't have any impact on the business whatsoever.
I remember many times in the first 10 minutes having to deal with the griping session of how they're all just like, but the management this, the owners that. And I'm going, we don't have that in this situation. Because actually I had the management team sitting in on the course as learners, with everybody else. So it's great to have kind of this flat hierarchy when you come to learning, lean or implementing this kind of methodology. Because we are all learners again, right? We actually all have to go back and go, actually, I'm an empty cup and I've got to be ready to listen and absorb and learn with my team. And that's a great way to kind of dissolve those old hierarchies that could have been hanging around.
So that's kind of the crack of the code, isn't it? That we were pretty good before because, we've been around for quite a while and we've been getting some pretty good results for the last 6 or 7 years. But I think that this last step that we've made where we've engaged the entire team of the business in the right way, to me, that's really cracking the code. It's getting everybody on board. You couldn't imagine coaching a team, but only coaching a segment of the team and winning a game.
No, right.
Again, sporting analogies have to creep in here somewhere.
I'll just talk to the goalie, and as long as you know what you're doing, we'll win, right?
Yeah, we'll win.
It doesn't work.
Or the defense team, and we're going to, it doesn't ever work, right? So
you can't explain a strategy to half a company. You just can't. It doesn't work that well. Because everyone else says, what are those guys talking about? What are they doing over there?
Or they think that they're secretly plotting against them, and then you've got this bad culture creeping in.
Yeah, why did you exclude us, And that's another thing, I don't think anyone does that intentionally. It's just that they don't have a process or that time, to spend explaining to people what's going on.
Yeah, so that's really what excites me about what we're doing now is the connection to everybody across the entire business.
What I liked about it as well was, now when I go and have a coaching session, there's more tangible things to go back to and talk about. The guys brought this up in the training session. Yep. I think this is probably a lot of people listening in, if they've got joinery business, can relate to this. If you handle 3600 board and you've got a 4-meter doorway to get it through, and you've got a forklift process getting it through, that has been raised as a hazard in 2 of the 4 places we went to. Yep. And what was good is the owners or the production managers that are in that group at that time, they take that on as an actual, we recognise that is a problem. And I know you've been talking about it for months, but actually now let's go and do something about it and create a better process for you. Yeah. Because it's not fair to ask someone to be so good on the forklift and managing a 10 centimetre gap either side. And then as soon as they chip something, you go, hey, you go, mate, that's a quite hard job, especially if you're doing it daily, and then trying to weave through a factory and get it to a machine.
Yeah, it's that weaving through the factory that's maybe indicating the layout's maybe not so great.
Yeah, another good thing that's come up pretty routinely in the workshops is panel saw usage. And something appeared, a coin kind of dropped in my brain the other day. I was going, I think a lot of companies have panel saws as an overhang from when they didn't used to have a CNC. Yeah. And now they have a CNC. I go, so what do you actually use your panel saw for? Because it's quite a dangerous machine statistically, and it's huge. Yeah. And I go, whenever someone looks over, the guy's cutting something this big. Yeah. So I said, is it really worth hanging on to or using if you actually look at what you're doing on it? And you're actually never cutting anything bigger than a meter, right?
Yeah. So you're right. It's one of those comments that come up back in the early days of implementing CNC machines. We would, at the very least, we would take the sliding arm off.
Yeah, right.
And just use it as a ripping saw.
Yep.
Because a cabinet shop needs a table saw.
Yes.
May not need a panel saw though if you've got a CNC machine.
Yeah. And I think even now the newer machines, they have a really cool interface where the guy can literally, if you've got a 3600 sheet and you need to dice it in half, you can load it real quick, draw a line on the screen, and it can cut it.
It's a really interesting topic because what you're actually talking about is embedded beliefs, like old habits.
Yes.
And I had a client years ago, long time ago, and they'd entered a coaching session. Hey, we were looking at getting a second panel saw. And we really dug down to why, and it was because they had to dock thin lengths of things.
Right.
and you can do that on a panel saw. You put it on, you set your stops, and you start docking lengths of kick or, thin material. Why don't we just buy a chop saw and set up a chop saw station? It's going to take up way less space. It's going to cost you, it's not going to cost you $50,000. It's going to cost you a few hundred, maybe a few thousand, but that actually hadn't dawned on them.
Yeah.
Because their history was so long embedded in panel saw and cabinet shops that they just immediately went to another panel saw.
Yeah. I mean, it opens up that great conversation about right size equipment.
Yeah.
And is it the right size for the work that you do on there? And if you're only cutting a 3600 board in half once every 6 months, then maybe talk to the supplier and have it cut and brought in that way.
Yeah. Rather
than having a panel saw sitting there just for that one moment or 2 times a year.
What's the floor space actually worth?
Yeah, like if you work out what rent you're paying to house that machine and keep it at home all year, and then you work out what value you're getting from the pieces you're cutting on it, it's not paying for itself. It's not earning its keep, right? So yeah, it's a great conversation. But the thing that dawned on me was, we've implemented CNC, but you've been in business so long that panel saw just seems like a staple for you.
Yeah.
But now you've got the CNC, pretty hardly using it. Yeah. So there were some good takeaways.
So, Nigel, we've talked a fair bit about process and what we've been doing for the last over 12 months. I've got a really serious question for you.
All right, cool. I like serious questions.
You are only allowed to go to one more concert for the rest of your life. Now, this could be someone dead or alive, doesn't matter. Who do you go and see? What concert do you attend?
It's got to be the Grateful Dead.
The Grateful Dead?
Just because I'm not familiar with a lot of their music, but I just heard amazing things about the way they would riff for hours and hours at some of their concerts. And I love the concept of not having a structured concert where they just really kind of go with the flow. Yeah, I love that. So I think I'd love to go and see that.
I'm going to have to YouTube the Grateful Dead because it's been a long time since I've seen anything. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I keep saying James Brown, but I'm now starting to rethink.
I'm lucky I saw him before he died at a large concert in the UK where there's lots of artists.
Yeah.
He was amazing. Even I think he was in his 70s.
Yeah.
Could still shuffle and move just unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable guy to watch.
Well, this has been good. So thanks for enlightening us on your experience so far. I really love working with you. And what I love most is seeing the smile on your face, because I can tell that you really love seeing efficiencies gain and seeing, I know we hate using the word efficiency, but just seeing the gains or those steps forward because I think it's true that a lot of people that we work with have been frustrated over a number of years because they know they can do better. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
And now we're really teaching them the how part of it, which anybody could do. You could jump on YouTube and see the how.
Yeah.
But the real key thing is having somebody hold you accountable to actually implement it.
I think that's the key, isn't it? It's especially hard to run a business on your own because you can feel there can be some very dark moments, right? Where you just feel like shrinking back or going back to how you did it before.
Yeah.
So, it's very important to have someone that can keep you going, no, the goal is the goal. We've got to get to this. We've got to get less WIP in the factory. We've got to get things in upright trolleys. How we get there, we can try different ways, but we only really fail once we stop trying. That's the beauty about lean is you can always pick it back up at any time. It's never over until you really said, I don't want to just do this anymore. Yeah. But, it's not so much the efficiency. I like seeing the light bulbs that go off in people's heads when they get to that and go, oh, yeah, wow. You see, they've just suddenly visualized something. And I say, what I learned with my coach was when you can visualize it, it's going to happen. Yeah. Might not be tomorrow. Once you've got that picture in your head of how it can be, your subconscious actions will drive you towards that outcome. Yeah. And then it's actually easier.
I find it interesting too. You probably experienced this yourself. When we talk about lean manufacturing as a concept, a lot of people in the industry that we're in, I think automatically go to this, oh, that's not for us.
Yep.
All those other big businesses, those cookie cutter, they're doing lean. We're not, that maybe that won't work for us. And what I find really interesting, that light bulb moment you were just talking about, is once they realize they're already lean to a degree.
Yeah.
Everybody is already on a scale of how lean or how efficient, how productive, however we measure that, everybody's already on that scale. So it's not like you have to choose whether you're going to do it or not. You're already doing it.
That's right, yeah.
And once that light bulb comes on, I've seen it happen so many times when explained that way, that all we're really doing is helping you move farther along the dial. All we're going to do is help you get better. Yeah. It's not like you're terrible, because if you were that bad, the business would be closed.
That's right. Yeah.
If the game would be over, we wouldn't even be talking.
Yeah.
But you're at a point where you're probably okay, not terrible, not excellent, And most people want to get better, and maybe they're willing to strive to excellence.
Yeah.
Not everybody is prepared to strive for excellence, but we should at least strive for much better than we are right now, I would think.
Well, I think that's why people come and ask for help, because not everyone's asking for help, right?
Yeah.
Some people think they know enough to get as far as they want to go.
Yeah.
The ones that ask for help obviously see that they know there's something better they could be doing, or doing something in a more efficient way or a better way. Yeah. They've tried a lot of times and they've struggled, and so they're realizing that I maybe need some help.
Maybe there's something else.
Yeah, maybe I need some help, and someone else who's done this already can actually teach me or show me how to do it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to keep banging my head against the wall more than I've done so already. Yeah. So I think people who ask for help are already lean because they've already been trying.
Yeah.
Like I said, that journey is when you start trying. It's never over until you actually say, no, I don't want to do that anymore.
I'm stuck. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for the chat. Hopefully everybody's
it.
taken something away from the little bits of gold nuggets that we've talked about today.
Yep.
And we'll have you on again soon and talk more about the progress of our program.
Awesome. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you.